Hi everybody, welcome to tonight's webinar. It's on imagination and creativity. What I'd like to do is, before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody, can you see what's on the screen? And can you hear me okay? If you would just type into the chat, just yes, what you need to do, or no, if you can't. I want to make sure that this gets recorded okay. It looks like we don't have any viewers at the moment, so I will ask again in a moment. Okay, it looks like somebody else just got on. So if you could, type in the chat box, say hi, and tell me if you can see the screen and you can hear me. And I suppose if you can't hear me and you don't do anything, then I'll assume that you can't hear me. Oops. Hi, Diane. It's good to see you're here. Okay, so what we're going to talk about this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and get started now, is hopefully everybody can see and hear everything. Hold on just a second here, so I can get to this. Okay, so what ends up happening is I hear this a lot. I'm not very creative, and I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but that's one of the things that I hear a lot, is that I don't have a whole lot of creativity. And what I want to say about creativity is that creativity is not just something that you're born with. It's more, it's hard work. So what I'd like to do is just first, I want to talk about a few misconceptions that a lot of people have about imagination and creativity. And for everybody that's on tonight, I think this is interesting because this is Pat's sixth key to success, is imagination. And if you watch Pat, he's very imaginative, but he's also very spontaneous. One of the things that I think most everyone, they associate together is spontaneity and imagination. And I want you to think about them as not necessarily being the same thing. Okay, you can be spontaneous with your imagination, but you don't have to be. And so that's probably one of the biggest things that I want you to kind of get through your mind, is that it doesn't have to be in the moment that you're creative. Now, Pat, like I say, he's very creative in the moment, but being creative or imaginative doesn't necessarily mean you have to be spontaneous. The next thing misconception that I want to talk about is I think many people believe creativity is something that you're born with. And if you weren't born with it, then too bad. And you're always envious of what you might consider creative people. But at the same time, I want you to think about this whole process is that creativity is, I think it's a process that we go through, and it's something that you can learn. I mean, yes, there might be some people that are maybe a little bit more, their brain works a little bit differently, but that doesn't mean that we're not creative. It just means that we haven't taken the time to develop that process yet. So I want you to think about creativity is really a process. And then the last misconception is, and it really relates to the last one too, is kind of the whole idea of your level of creativity is set. It's kind of like set in stone, and you can't really improve it. You can't really get more of it. You can't really lose it. And here again, and relating back to the next one, I want you to think of it as something that you can learn, and it is a process that we can all go through. So, first thing that I want to look at is that, well, what is imagination? And I got to thinking about it, and I looked up the definition in the dictionary, and then I kind of came up with my own definition, and I just say it's the ability to think of a unique thought or modify something in an original way. And so when you think about it like that, it's not a flash of inspiration or just an idea that comes to you offhand. It's the ability to really think about something in a different way, in a unique way, in a special way. And it can be a completely new thought, although there are people out there that says there are no new thoughts. That may or may not be true. I mean, it might be a new thought for you. And relating that back to horsemanship, I want you to think of it in the sense of it's maybe something that you've never done with your horse before. And we're going to get into some practical things about how to think about this, but I also want you to think about it as it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a completely new idea or a completely new thought. It might just be modifying a thought or a task or something in an original way. So you basically just build on a task or a process that you already know, a standard process, that you just tweak it in some way or another and make it new. So that can also be creativity. So here again, I want you to think about what imagination is. It's about having unique thoughts. It's not about a flash of inspiration. So it's not something that necessarily just pops in your head in a moment. Okay? So we think about developing imagination. I want you to kind of think about the whole process of developing imagination or creativity. And I'm using those two words, imagination and creativity, the same this evening. I suppose you could get real picky about it, but for what I'm doing, it's definitely the same. So the first thing that I want you to think about is you have to believe in your own creativity. Okay, and what I mean by that is we all have our own special creativity, and I want you to change how you think about it. It's like I said, I've heard so many times in various clinics and lessons and things like that, that I'm not very creative, or I'm not very imaginative, or I can't think of anything else to do. But what I want you to, you've got to get out of that kind of limiting belief that says I can't think of anything, or I'm not creative, or I'm not imaginative. So I want you to change how you think about it. And then the next thing I want you to do is change how you speak about your own creativity and about yourself, both internally and externally. Um, you know, if you're having trouble coming up with something, at least put a modifier on there and say, I can't think of anything yet. And that doesn't close the door, because what I've found, and my mom used to say this to me all the time, and it used to make me furious when I was a little boy. She said, can't never could. And, at the time, it just made me mad. And now I think about it, and I think it's a pretty good statement. Because if you're always saying you can't do something, whether out loud or in your head, and probably even more importantly in your head, you're saying, I can't do this, I can't be creative, I can't think of anything else, I can't think of how else to do this, I can't, whatever, fill in the blank. And of course, what you've done to your mind at that point is you've shut off any kind of possibilities of thinking in a new way. And so I think by using the can't, or a limiting type of vocabulary or thought process, is really, it's gonna affect your creativity. So those are the first two things that I would really encourage all of you to really focus on: is think about how you think about things, think about how you talk about things, both in your head and out loud. And the next thing that I want you to think about would be developing an awareness of your current creativity. I think that's something that many of us are not really aware of, how creative we really are, because we put ourselves down. But yet you're creative all the time in the workplace, dealing with situations, dealing with people, dealing with all kinds of things that come up in your life. And I know that you're successful at least in some of them. I mean, maybe not in 100% of the things, but that's where creativity lives, is you being able to respond to new, different situations. And what I think is important about becoming aware of that, I think the important part of it is, the very last thing is being able to acknowledge that you are creative in ways that maybe you hadn't really thought of before, but you still have that creativity. And all you have to do is be able to take it from one sphere of your life into a different sphere, which is what we're talking about this evening, would be into horsemanship. But maybe you're very creative when it comes to dealing with your kids or grandkids, things like that. But you just can't think of anything to do with your horse. It's like, well, what's the thought process that you go through with your kids or grandkids to help you come up with new ideas and fun things to do with them, and see if you can apply that to your horsemanship. Okay. So the next part about developing your imagination is I want you to start thinking about imagination is not just an idea that just pops into your head, but it's work. It's something that you really have to apply yourself to. And think about it, it's a process of thought. It's like maybe you get an idea and say, oh, that's not real good. Think about it a little more and think, that's better. Oh, I could do that. I could do this. I could, and it's kind of like, and really, if you think about it, many times if you get one idea, it kind of sparks other ideas. But it's a work, something that you have to put into practice. And I'm going to mention a book, well, actually two books, but they're by the same author. And the author's name is Steven Pressfield. And one of them, the first book is called The War of Art. And the other thing is Do the Work. And basically, he's a writer. He writes novels. He writes historical fiction. He's written movies. So he's a writer, and so he really concentrates on the creative process. And that's what the book, The War of Art, is all about. And he talks about the various things whenever you try to be creative or try to create art. And in this way, and he talks about art in a very general way. He thinks not only does he say art would be like painting and music and dance and things like that, but he also talks about business as being art. He talks about the idea of anything that progresses humanity further as being art. And he talks about there being certain principles in the world that kind of, for lack of a better way to say it, is that they're fighting against us. So it's kind of like he presents it kind of as a battle, and that's why it's called the War of Art. The battle that we go through in order to get art into the world. And he talks a lot about the creative process and some of the things that kind of stand against it. And then the second book would be, I can't remember the name of it, Do the Work. And I think that's an interesting one too. I read that one, and these are both very short books that you could get them and read them in an afternoon or a long evening or something like that. But Do the Work is very practical, and he talks about how the various obstacles that as an artist, and here again he's got a broad definition of art, and you could think of horsemanship as being an art too, is that there are certain things that kind of hold us back, and they're very common among all of us that try to produce anything in the world. And so those would be two books that I would recommend if you're interested. So here again, I want you to think about apply yourself. Creativity and imagination, it's work. It's not something passive that just, an idea pops into your head. You have to apply yourself. Okay, the next thing about this I want you to think about would be rethinking things. And see if you can see things in a different way. Meaning, the tasks that you're doing with your horse, I want you to rethink those. Think about them in a different way, in a different approach, something different. And like I said, we're going to go into, I'm going to give some examples in a little bit. Um, but a lot of it is, it's really just apply yourself and then reapply yourself and think about, what's going on. And it even kind of reminds me of um, Ronnie Will's statement about, um, do you thinking at night? And I guess the whole part of that is, um, how did it go? Play with your horse, or do your feeling in the day and you're thinking at night. And basically what he means by that is, when you're with your horse, use feel. When you're away from your horse, then really think about, then you can get very logical and you can think about it. But when you're with your horse, you kind of play in the moment with them. And then when you're done, then you can go ahead and do your critical thinking about, well, if I would have done this, or if I would have done that, or maybe my horse needs more of this. Those are the kinds of things. And that's where you can you can analyze your horse and then start using some creative thinking. I'm going to put some new ideas, some new approaches, new things to do with your horse. Okay? And then the last thing about imagination is work, is I want you to write your ideas down. And I want you to keep a notebook. I think it's important for you to have some place where you can keep your ideas, so that whenever you're at a loss for to do anything, you're still able to, you can refer back to your notebook and say, oh, this was the idea that I had. Okay, so here again, kind of hearkening back to the whole idea of spontaneity. Creativity doesn't have to be spontaneous. It can be pre-planned before you ever get to the paddock to play with your horse. You can have your ideas written down in your notebook, and I think that's actually a very good idea for some of you that kind of get stuck. And all you have to do is just remember to pull your notebook out. Okay. So, are there any questions at this point? I'll just kind of pause for a minute, and if anybody has a question, they can go ahead and just type it in the chat box there. Maybe I'll be able to answer it. Get a sip of water here. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and go on. Okay, so I want you to develop a plan. And when I say that, it's kind of like, well, how can you have a plan and still be creative or be imaginative? Well, the imaginative part of it can be done before you actually write the plan, and I guess during the process too. And here again, it's like, since creativity doesn't have to be spontaneous, then you can make a plan. And I really do believe that most people think of creativity or imagination as being something that happens, it just kind of strikes people in the moment. And I think that does happen at times, but I don't think that has to be the way that it works. One of the things that I want you to do as far as developing this plan is, I want you to make a list of all the obstacles that are available to you. And when I talk about obstacles, I'm talking about things for your horse to play with, not obstacles standing in your way. But like, you have poles, barrels, tarps, cones, you know, any kind of thing like that. Poles that maybe stand upright, jumps, a ditch, a bridge, a big tire. I'm just kind of off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the things that I have at my place. And so if you just make a list of those, just to start with, you have big cones, little cones, big barrels, little barrels, those kinds of things. So just make a list to start with. And then what I want you to think about doing is, how could you combine those obstacles in a new or unique way? So it could be something like, hey, maybe I've got a ditch and I've got some barrels. So, hey, could I put a barrel in the ditch and have my horse jump over the barrel that's in the ditch? Or could I put some cones in the ditch and have my horse and maybe go down the ditch long ways and have them, back through 2 cones as they're backing down the ditch, or anything like that. So just start thinking about, put some cones on top of a tarp, put some barrels on top of a tarp, put a pole on top of some barrels. I don't know what you've got, but I want you to start thinking about, how can you combine all the obstacles that you have there already to make something new and something different, a new task. And then go out and play with those. So, on your piece of paper, you might have, say, 10 obstacles that you have at your barn, and then how could you put 2 of those together, and that would be, you could have another 10 things, or and you could actually add a 3rd obstacle in there, and you might even have 20, 30, 40 different things that you could do with just the obstacles that you have already. Okay? Next thing you could do is, if you've used up all those obstacles, you could go out and you could purchase, or you could build a new obstacle. Think about maybe building a bridge, or a platform, or pedestal, or something like that. Or you could purchase one. And then you could add that to all the other things that you already got. Okay, maybe you put your pedestal on top of a tarp. I don't know what it might be. It's like, but that's the way to start, being creative, is just, how can you combine and recombine the things that you already have? I think to a certain extent, routine is good, consistency is good, but you need to add some variety, especially once your horse gets confident with the obstacles that you have already. Like, you need to add some variety. You need to add something new in the whole mix. And then what I want you to do is take a cheat sheet with you, and the cheat sheet could be in the form of your list of obstacles and your unique combinations. Fold it up in a piece of paper and take it with you, or write it down in your notebook that we talked about earlier. I think all those things are really good if you can do things like that. And so you've got a little cheat sheet. You go, now I wonder what I should do now, and you can just quickly just whip out that piece of paper in your pocket and say, oh yeah, I could put this on top of that and run this through there and make a whole new obstacle. And so the creativity, I think, is there. I think what most people get hung up is they have trouble being creative in the moment. And so what I'd love to hear from you guys, later on this week, is how this is going, and if you're able to make a list and how you've been able to play with your horse in unique ways. Okay, so that's one thing that you could do. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about stealing ideas. And I guess better than maybe talking about stealing ideas, maybe I should say borrowing ideas from others. And what would be fun is just, Pat and Linda, they do all kinds of very unique things. Pat does probably even more unique things than Linda. But I want you to watch Pat and say, oh, that's really cool, I wish I could do that. And maybe you can copy it, but then you go, oh, I could never do that. What you might go is like, can I do a modified version of what Pat's doing? And that would be creativity. Maybe it's some instructors that you've seen playing with their horses, or at a Savvy conference, or at a tour stop, I mean, or maybe you see instructors playing with their horses, or it could be friends that other students that that are doing some pretty interesting things with their horses. It's fun for me as an instructor because I see lots of different people play with lots of different things, and it's really kind of interesting to watch. It's like one student will be real creative in one area and then have a hard time in another area, and then there'll be another student who will be just the opposite, where they'll be very strong in that area where the other one was weak, and then they'll be weak in the area where the other one might be strong. So just borrow things from your friends. Watch, oh, I've never seen anybody do that with a tree before, or with a jump. It's like, maybe I could do something like that. Okay? So I see that good. So it looks like Shelley said this is helpful for planning a levels audition. Yeah, I think that's really important, that when you do your audition, that you put a little bit of creativity in there. There's usually between about 6 and 8 tasks that you have to do, and if you just did those tasks, it would take about 3 minutes, and then you've got to fill it up with the rest other stuff. So be creative, come up with your own stuff. Okay? Another source of ideas to steal or borrow, however you want to think about it, would be on YouTube. There's some really cool stuff on YouTube. There's also some stuff on there that you really don't want to copy, but there's some kind of interesting stuff. People doing things, not just Pirelli students. It's like, I want you to think about, broaden your horizons. There's cool things that Pirelli students are doing. There's also some pretty cool things that are outside of Pirelli. Okay. So then the next thing that I want you to think about would be cross industries, and the one that I was thinking about is, and when I say cross industries, it's just horses as opposed to dogs. Watch what dog trainers are doing with their dogs. Does that give you any ideas about things that you could do with your horse? Maybe, I've seen people teach their horses to fetch, and maybe that's not exactly what you want, but there's things like what we call stick to me. It's basically like heel with your dog, sit, stay, or ground tying your horse. So there might be things from watching dog events, and I'm sure there's hundreds of dog events that you could see or that you could watch that might spark some ideas. The other thing I would say is, within each breed, there's always something unique that breed is famous for. And it doesn't matter if your horse is not that breed, but it could be, go to a horse show or something that you see Maybe it's a Morgan horse show, or it's a Arab horse show, or it's it could be any number, Appaloosa horse show, and they'll do different events, things in there that you might get ideas of things that you could do with your horses. Here again, it kind of goes back to kind of the same idea, the different breeds, but different disciplines. Within the English, they do certain things. Western do other sorts of things. Trail riders do different things. Endurance people do different things. Get an idea of what they do with their horses, and maybe you could apply it to what you do with your horse. And I want you to think about, there's over 600 horse, I guess events is not really the term that I would want there, but horse activities maybe that go on in the world. And probably the best thing would be to expose yourself to those new kinds of activities with different horses, different breeds, different activities. There could be regional things that you could go to that they do something that's very, very unique. And so something that you could do with your horse, or maybe it will spark something in you to kind of think, oh, they're doing this, maybe I could do something not exactly that, but something similar. So I want you to start thinking in terms of there's a whole wide world of things out there that people are doing with your horses. And probably one of the reasons why Pat is very, very creative is because he's been exposed to all those kinds of activities. Maybe not every single one, but a lot of those different types of activities in various parts of the world, various regions. And he's just kind of he's been exposed to it. He's taken the good, he's taken the and maybe some of the bad he's thrown out, but he's taken that the good part of it and incorporated it into the things that he does with his horse. Like, the more I learn about various things, it's really interesting to watch Pat and say, he got that from such and such. I kind of know that maybe where he got that idea from. So so with you, I would like for you to, and maybe you could add some more things to this, places to steal ideas from, but I think this will give you kind of a place to start, at least. Okay? So the last thing that I want you to do, or we're going to talk about, is just some tips. And that would be combine and recombine games to make something new. So what I'm saying is, you've got 7 games. How can you take those 7 games and combine them in a new way? The circling game and the porcupine game. So maybe you could porcupine your horse in a circle, sideways, something like that. But you've taken 3 games, and you've made something new that maybe you've never tried before. I mean, I just thought of that off the top of my head, and I go, maybe I'll have to go try that with my horses to see if I can do that. And who knows, maybe somebody else has already thought of that, but to me, that's a completely new idea. So therefore, it's going to be completely new to my horse, and so it's going to be variety in the things that we do. Okay, so here again, there used to be a little flip book that they had. I can't even remember how many years ago it was, but you could kind of flip certain parts of it and different parts, and one part would say porcupine game, and then the next one would be a barrel or something like that. And so you could combine and recombine all the different games with an obstacle. So I want you to think about that too. It's like, take all those obstacles, those maybe 10, 12, 15 obstacles that you have at your place, and then go through and think about, okay, for this obstacle, let's just say it's a pole, how could I play the friendly game with it? Okay, maybe you could rub it on their back. Maybe you could have them stand over it, straddle over it, or something like that. Play the friendly game with it. How can you play the porcupine game with it? Well, maybe you could pick it up and actually ask them to move away from it, kind of like a big stick. How could you play the driving game with it? Well, maybe not actually with it, but maybe you could stand on the pole and play the driving game with your horse. And so I want you to kind of think about, so now you've got 10 things, or 10 obstacles, with 7 things that you can do with each one of those obstacles. So now that's 70 things that you can do. Then I want you to think about, play with something, or play with your task or your obstacle or the game. Play it from a different angle. Okay? Move yourself into a different position. And that's why the driving game is so fun, as far as like line driving. You can drive your horse forward from zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, directly behind zone 5, or you could even, your angle could be 45 degrees out from your horse and still drive them forward. So those are the kinds of things, and you could have any number of angles, how you can play the various things. It's like, yeah, there are certain things that the angle is critical, but for other games and for other obstacles and things like that, the angle could be different. Okay, say like a lot of times you have your horse jump barrel. Most of the time we're standing 10 feet straight in, with the barrels straight in front of us. Could you set it up where you were at a 45 degree angle and still get your horse to jump over it? I remember that's one of the things that I can't remember exactly. It's one of the tests that I had was, can you send your horse into the trailer from 45 feet away at a 45 degree angle? And so that was the challenge that we had. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is, as far as tips, as far as creativity, would be vary the distance. Play with something, whether it's an obstacle or a game, from a different distance. Can you drive your horse from 45 feet away or from 3 feet away? Can you get your horse to circle at a longer distance and maybe at a different angle? Can you get your horse to, everything? The further you get away from them, the less influence they have, and so therefore the more respect you need, the further you get away from them. So it's kind of like, okay, that helps you develop respect. So be thinking about combine and recombine the games. Think about different angles. Think about different distances. Those are all different ways that you can be creative. Think about all the different sports and horse activities that are out there, that you could borrow some ideas from, or steal them from your friends, or however you would like to do it. So this is kind of coming to an end. And I just want to end with this question. What are you going to do to increase your creativity? Think of 1 or 2 things that maybe you could do, even starting this evening, or starting tomorrow, the next time you see your horse. What is going to be one of the things that you're going to do, 1 or 2 things that you're going to do to increase your creativity? So I'm going to just kind of hop back over into the to the chat and see if you guys have any comments about what your creativity or what things you're going to do to increase your creativity. So I think, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of just talk off the cuff here, give you guys a chance to write something if you're going to. But I think creativity, here again, is one of those things that we have a false idea of what it really is, and therefore we think we don't have any. And I really think that all of us have probably more creativity than you could even imagine. And your imagination can be very vivid. I like the idea of, and I even put a quote up one time, but I think the whole idea of, if you don't think you're creative, do you ever worry? Because really all worry is negative creativity. You're creating scenarios in your head of what could happen. And so that's kind of a sobering thought, really, but if you can worry, you can be creative. Okay. Okay. Well, if there's no comments, I haven't seen any come through here recently. I'm going to go ahead and we can carry on this conversation. If you want to shoot me an email or leave something, this would probably be the best place, would be to leave a comment on the blog, and then we can continue the discussion there, and we'll continue the discussion in a couple weeks when we have our phone conversation. And also remember, if you've got any horse questions, just go ahead and leave those. Okay, so so Shelley just said one thing that you've done in her clinics is they played all 7 games with 1 obstacle, and that's helped get the juices flowing. And she likes the idea of combining the games. It's like, those are always good. Like, can you just pick one thing and play, do as many things with it as you can? Because, you know, there's sometimes when you put a barrel out there and say, be creative. First thing that people think about is, I'm going to jump my horse over it. And so I think that's really good if you can just think about that barrel. Maybe you can play the friendly game with it. You could stand on it. You could do the circling game while you're standing on it. You could sit on it. You could do all kinds of things. You could play porcupine game with it. You could put it on your horse's back, which would be another friendly game. You know, you could do circles around it. Like I said, either sitting on it or standing on it. And that's a really good one. That you find out if your horse is pulling at all, you stand on a barrel, because if they pull, sometimes the barrel tips over and you get to jump off. So I like Diane's thing about mixing things up. That's great. Prior to writing. So I did finally get a few responses. I think the way that this works is there's kind of a delay from the time that I'm talking till the time you hear it, till the time it comes back. So just something that I need to get used to. I need to ask questions earlier. Okay? Well, with that, I really thank you guys for showing up. I thank you for participating. Hopefully this has helped you. And I hope you go out and you you take some of these lessons to heart, and you start becoming more and more creative with your horse, so that your horse won't get bored with the same old things over and over again. So thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.